Welcome, everybody, to this Sunday edition of the Freedom Links Conspiracy Chronicles on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph, and I'm joined tonight by my good buddy Tim Watts. Tim, what's going on tonight, buddy?
Hey, Joey, good to hear that you're sounding a little better today.
I'm on the mend, my man. I'm on the mend. So tonight, folks, we want to take Conspiracy Chronicles and focus. Basically, I'm going to do a quick recap of what we talked about during the week about this attack on the Second Amendment and our constitutional God-given natural rights. And then we're going to get into what is this really all about and who really wants to take the guns away. Is it really liberal, left-wing people, or are they just misinformed? Are they uninformed? You know, Thomas Jefferson said it best when he said, "Inform the people generally, and tyranny and oppression will vanish like the dark at the dawn of the day." And, of course, that's not the only thing that Thomas Jefferson was famous for. But they knew their stuff because they fought against this same type of power that we now face again. And, you know, Timmy, it's interesting because the Founding Fathers right now would be rolling in their grave, number one, over the sacrifice that they made to free us from the reign of King George III and Great Britain. But the interesting thing in all of it is they never really lost their grip, did they?
No, they didn't. You know, when you do the research, you know, and you start looking back, it just keeps going farther and farther and farther. You think, all right, when does this stop? You know, you get back to World War II, World War I, you get back to the Civil War. I mean, it just keeps going and going, and you realize, hey, this started the moment we left England. I mean, they really didn't want, you know, the colonists to be independent, not truly independent, you know, and it's been a fight to take this country back ever since.
That's right. Now, what's interesting about this the scenario that unfolded this week, people will go and say there's more to the shooting than what we've seen and that what we've heard in the media. And I agree. However, now's not the time to be worrying about who did what and how it happened. Right now's the time to fight against this potential gun grab that's going to take place. And what's interesting, Tim, is the dynamic of what's surrounding it right now. For instance, not only do we have talk of there being an assault weapons ban being reinstituted. I know that Dianne Feinstein is, again, talking about it, and that people are sadly misinformed as to what an assault weapon is. Again, it's a misinformation slant uninformation problem that we're dealing with. But we're also facing economic hardship. We're also facing the implementation of one of the largest socialist programs that I've ever seen in my entire life, bar none, bigger than Social Security and Medicare. And we're also looking at draconian tax increases over the next 2 years that will most certainly thrust this nation back into recession, if not back into depression. And all that aside, you have to ask yourself, A, how convenient is the timing of this gun grab, considering that, you know, prior to the election, Tim, this was taboo. This wasn't even spoken of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it would definitely cause him to lose the fight to be reelected. I mean, they can throw the election only so much, and then it becomes just, unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And so, if he had took that stance before the election, okay. But, the election may have been different. But now, as he has his, quote, mandate, he gets to go at it full tilt.
Yeah.
Just about the time that all of this stuff is about to hit at the same time.
Yeah, and it's not just Obama, it's everybody in Congress. I mean,
right.
And to your point, we've talked about this all week, Joe. None of them, not a one of them would have ever entertained bringing something up like taking America's guns away from us before the election. And we had plenty of shooting incidents here in the United States with Aurora and Oregon, and gosh, the list is pretty long. But none of them, after all of this, had the political will to stand up and say, we're going to take America's guns until after the election. Now, once that election's over and they've all got their jobs, suddenly everybody's got a little bit of political spine and they all want to take our guns away from us. But it's a good point, Joey. None of them would dare say this before the election came around.
That's right. And who do these people serve, these non-representing representatives? They certainly don't serve the people who they're supposed to serve, who they're subservient to. Oh, no. They're subservient to the people that get them elected, that fund them. And so tonight we'll discuss who those people are. And boy, Timmy, the tentacles are far-reaching, aren't they?
Oh, man, it goes back. But you know what? It always comes back to just flat-out big money. Because you think, who could possibly pull off a coup against the United States and pull off all the things that actually happen around the world? It's not, little people with grandiose dreams. It's people that already have big money. That's the only way you can accomplish any of the things that have happened in this country from the dawn of man. Big money has always been our Achilles heel. It's always been the scourge, the blight that, plagues us on this earth. And that's what you'll find out tonight, folks, that this all leads back to big money and who has the most money. We're going to talk about that.
That's right. And basically, folks, what we're getting at the end of the day, this is all about the implementation of the, quote, New World Order. That's really what it is. And we're going to discuss who those people are that started this process. And you'll be floored to find out that it didn't happen in 1913. It didn't happen in 1871. It goes back as far as 1773.
Yep.
Before the United States even declared independence. So buckle up, because this is going to be a very interesting journey through how the tentacles not only grew, but wrapped themselves around the United States, in the world for that matter. And the fact of the matter is, the United States, folks, is the last armed country, the last country with an armed citizenry in the world, and their last hurdle towards world domination. They've got Europe, and it won't take them long for the rest of the cards to fall if we fall. The world is watching us, folks, and they're looking to America to save them. So let's put our best foot forward and take a historical journey. You're listening to the Freedom Links Conspiracy Chronicles on the Orion Talk Radio Network. We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, start your day the right way here on Orion Talk Radio, because we've got morning radio for you. We kick it off with Super Dave in the morning at 7 a.m. with the Super Dave Show. And then we segue right into the wake-up call with Rudy Z live from London. Rudy on from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. That's morning radio right here the right way on Orion Talk Radio. You're listening to the Conspiracy Chronicles with Joe Joseph, Tim Watts, and we're talking tonight about the conspiracy to take over the United States, kind of wrapping up everything that's happened this last week here with the big gun grab, and trying to show exactly where it's going. Because, folks, this is a conspiracy, a long, long conspiracy that's gone on, well, ever since the inception of this country, with one goal in mind, a totalitarian one-world dictatorship, and that's the New World Order, and that's going to be run by the ultra-rich.
Boy, you're not kidding, Timmy.
Yep, the central banks. And let's call a spade and name names. It is the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. These two empires of wealth, these families that have trillions of dollars, they are the ones that have actually been leading this effort for many, many, many years.
That's right. And so let's go back to 1773. where we have Mayor Amschel Rothschild assembles 12 of his most influential friends
Yep.
and convinces them that if they all pool their resources together, they can rule the world. This meeting takes place in Frankfurt, Germany. Rothschild also informs his friends that he's found the perfect candidate, an individual of incredible intellect and ingenuity to lead the organization he has planned. And his name, Tim, is Adam Weishaupt. Now, again, you don't really know that name too well, but Weishaupt is very, very important in how this idea and how this body of elitists come to be, how they come together. And in May 1st of 1776, Adam Weishaupt, codenamed Spartacus, establishes a secret society called the Order of the Illuminati. There it is, Tim.
Yeah.
The Illuminati. Weishaupt is a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, part of Germany. The Illuminati seek to establish a new world order. And here are their objectives. Now, folks, this was put out in 1776. 1. Abolition of all ordered governments. 2. Abolition of all private property. 3. Abolition of all inheritance. 4. Abolition of patriotism. 5. Abolition of the family. 6. Abolition of religion. And finally, 7. Creation of a world government. Now, folks, you can go look this up. And you know where you're going to find this? Surprisingly enough, if you want some more current documentation, say maybe only 150 years old or so, just go take a look at the Communist Manifesto, because it's all in there. But Karl Marx didn't come up with that. You see, this goes way back to 1776. And these bullet points were used as a basis to form the Illuminati. Now, when you hear the word Bavarian Illuminati, understand that it's not because the people are Bavarian. It's because that Adam Weishaupt was a professor and lived in Bavaria. So that is why you hear Bavarian Illuminati. That goes back to the original, the formation, and the start of the group of people to start this new world order. You know, this modern day Illuminati, they all go back. This is a rich history. Very, very rich history, Tim.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Mr. Rothschild, because remember, this is how it all starts, folks, and this is the ideology that's behind that. You know, Rothschild figured out long ago how you could usurp a nation, and this is a quote that a lot of folks have probably heard many times, but this is from Mayor Amschel Rothschild. He says, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." It's a very simple precept to understand, you know. Once you figure that out, you realize, you know, that's the way to get to a country. Now, another mail, another correspondence from the Rothschilds, which is very damning to them, was written to bankers in New York City from the Rothschild brothers in London. Now, a lot of people have speculated this letter probably went to the Rockefellers, the Morgans, but this was the gist of the letter, and I quote, "The few who understand the system will either be so interested in its profits or be so dependent upon its favors that there will be no opposition from that class, while on the other hand, the great body of people, mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantage that capital derives from the system, will bear its burdens without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests." And that again from the Rothschild brothers of London, writing to associates in New York in 1863. Coincidentally, a home base for the Rockefellers and the Morgans. And the system that they're talking about, folks, is a Federal Reserve system. It's a system of money, currency with interest to enslave a nation.
That's right.
Yep. Go ahead, Joe.
No, that's absolutely right, Timmy. You know, the funny thing is too, is you can even take it back farther than the Bavarian Illuminati in the start in 1776, because the Bavarian Illuminati is actually spawned from Jesuit teachings, where Weishaupt himself, being a Jesuit, and he never was defrocked or retired, you know? And it's funny because the Jesuits have many front companies, I guess that you could say, similar to the CIA in nature. It's almost, the CIA is almost structured very similarly to that of the Vatican and how the Vatican is structured. So that's just another tidbit, because you could literally take it even farther back than this. But we're starting here for the purpose of, the United States and how it affects us. Now, I'm going to go to July 1782, Tim. The Order of the Illuminati joins forces with Freemasonry at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. The Comte de Verrieux, an attendee at the conference, comes away visibly shaken. When questioned about the tragic secrets he brought back with him, he replies, quote, "I will not confide them to you. I can only tell you that all this is very much more serious than you think." From this time on, according to his biographer, the Comte de Verrieux could only speak of Freemasonry with horror. And let's talk about this. When we talk about Freemasonry and we talk about the Illuminati, there is some symbology. There's symbology that's very close to us. For instance, on the $1 bill. You know, the insignia of the Order of the Illuminati first appeared on the reverse side of the U.S. $1 bill in 1933. One can read at the base of the 13-story pyramid, the year 1776 in Roman numerals. The eye radiating in all directions is the all-seeing eye that symbolizes the terroristic Gestapo-like agency set up by Weishaupt. This Latin word annuit coeptis means our enterprise has been crowned with success. And below, Novus Ordo Seclorum explains the nature of the enterprise, a new social order or a new world order. Folks, we'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away. So much more as the Conspiracy Chronicles continues looking into the New World Order.
Lincoln's greenbacks.
Oh, shit. Timmy live. Welcome back, folks. If you don't know about it, the new website is thefreedomlink.net. That's thefreedomlink.net. Joe Joseph here, along with Tim Watts, and we're diving into the New World Order. Very, very, very interesting. As all of this talk around the Second Amendment and taking the guns away consume us, you have to wonder what kind of distraction it is and what could be going on behind the scenes. Anytime I always see this kind of stuff, Tim, I always think about that, again, I hearken back to Rahm Emanuel, never let a crisis go to waste. Everybody is, and rightfully so, everybody's so focused on defending their Second Amendment right that, what else could be going on behind the scenes? It's something that people should be aware of, because the powers that be don't have tunnel vision, and we certainly shouldn't either. Ain't that right, buddy?
Yeah, no, they've been very focused in what they want to do. And again, you don't take over a country like the United States overnight. I mean, not without alerting, the mass populace. And that's the last thing that they really want to do. They'd rather come in and undermine this country and take it over in secret. And they've done a pretty damn good job of it so far, Joey. And again, we mentioned that it really goes back ever since we tried to escape England, since we tried to escape the monarchy, but we never really did. And they got their hooks in us pretty good. There were, and again, it goes to money, only 3 times in this nation's history have we had interest-free money, Joe. And we were just talking about that coming into the break. Looks like we missed our cue. But at any rate, colonial script, that was something that really annoyed England, and they didn't like that. So they set up the Currency Act of 1751 and the Currency Act of 1764, which destroyed colonial script. Now, what was colonial script? That was what the colonists came up with, is their form of currency, but it was interest-free. And that's such a huge deal because, the colonists would not fall into debt with their own colonial script. But the minute that the Currency Act of 1751 and 1764 were passed, that suddenly forced us back into the currency system of England, which was a currency system of interest, which immediately debted the colonists. And, Ben Franklin actually went out of his way. I've got a quote from Ben Franklin here, and I think it speaks to this whole thing quite well. If I could find a quote from Ben Franklin. Essentially, Ben Franklin said that in reference to the colonial script, he says, the colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The ability of colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War. Had nothing to do with tea, folks. Again, he says they would have borne the little tax on tea, but it came down to the fact that they took away colonial script, which immediately indebted this nation.
Absolutely, buddy. That's a very, very good point. And if you want a recent example in history of where this also happened, look no further than Libya. Because Libya was looking at doing the same thing, Muammar Gaddafi. Now, of course, I'm going to say this again. Don't know the guy personally, didn't know the guy personally, don't really care. All I know is actions, what he did for his people. Now, what he did for his people was very interesting. Loans, banks were required to give interest-free loans. That means that you didn't pay interest. The banks didn't make any money on it. That the currency had to be backed by tangible stuff like gold and oil and diamonds. Those were, tangible things. And he was teaching the countries in Africa to use their resources to gain financial independence. But the one thing that stood out in my mind when you were saying that was the interest-free loans and interest-free currency that he was establishing. And look what happened to Muammar Gaddafi and Libya. The bankers had to take him out. Don't believe the story about, oh, yes, he was such an awful person. Did he do things that were probably awful? I'm sure. Just like many other people have done in the history of the world. However, I will tell you this. It wasn't because of those actions that they deposed him and killed him. That wasn't the reason why. You have to do the research into this, folks, and you have to understand that, again, the powers that be don't have tunnel vision, and you shouldn't either. No. Don't believe the story that was told to you. Look at what it was that they were doing. What they were doing essentially was trying to take away the banksters' ability to loot and plunder the continent of Africa.
Yep.
And because of that, they had to take him out, much like Saddam Hussein taking the Iraq off the dollar standard for oil. Same thing, had to take him out.
Yep, both those guys. They said they were going to go off, the Federal Reserve fiat currency system. And, well, that's a crime, according to the Federal Reserve. You just don't, quit the Federal Reserve system. And it's awful what happened in Libya. And one of the telltale things, just the fact that the fighting's not done yet, Joe, and somehow they're able to institute a new, central bank in Libya when Muammar Gaddafi hasn't even ceded power yet. He hasn't even been toppled, and yet somehow they've, set up a new central bank, and that just speaks volumes. And again, this whole war on Muslims that they've started, I think the key principle behind that is that the Muslim religion does not believe in interest, interest on loans and stuff like that. And that's, goes against the grain of the central bankers, because what do? They want money at interest. And that's not something the Muslims believe in. So once you understand that, now you can start to figure out why, the Muslims have been targeted as scapegoats. And, it all ties back into Libya the same way. It was interest-free banking, and they didn't want that. So they put their own central bank in there. And so now, the Libyans are under the same kind of currency system we are, a debt system.
Right. So much like colonial script and how that was very offensive to the the Rothschilds and the Bank of England. The same thing can be said of current day events. And ask, if you know anybody that's Libyan or Egyptian or Iraqi or anything like that, simply ask them, how are things today compared to how it was before all this happened? And I guarantee you every single one of them will say, oh, man, it's gotten a lot worse since the Muslim Brotherhood took over. I mean, you have your acquaintance there right in your hometown, Timmy, that you talked to about the Egyptian takeover.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've got a dentist that I see, and I talked to him, probably right when Arab Spring was going on. I says, oh, gosh, it's really terrible for your country. Oh, no, this good thing, we're going to get rid of, Mubarak. And I'm like, no. So this is not a good thing. I'm telling you, this was fomented by the CIA. And he kind of looks at me like, oh, that's a bunch of hooey, And now I just saw him this week, and I says, how's things going in your country? And he said, oh, things are terrible. Things are very terrible. I said, I told you, I said it wasn't going to get better. It's the CIA that's taken over your country. They're the ones that have orchestrated all this. And he goes, yes, CIA behind everything. They're very evil. So you talk about a flip-flop from over a year, but this guy now finally gets it.
So now I'm going to take us to 1785. And in 1785, an Illuminati courier named Lance is struck by lightning and killed while traveling by horseback through the town of Ratisbon. When Bavarian officials examine the contents of his saddlebags, they discover the existence of the Order of the Illuminati and find plans detailing the coming French Revolution. The Bavarian government attempts to alert the government of France of the impending disaster, but the French government fails to heed this warning. Bavarian officials arrest all members of the Illuminati they can find, but Weishaupt and others have gone underground and cannot be found. And then we'll go to 1796. Freemasonry becomes a major issue in the presidential election in the United States. John Adams wins the election by opposing Masonry, and his son, John Quincy Adams, warns of the dire threat to the nation posed by Masonic lodges. Quote, I do conscientiously and sincerely believe that the order of the Freemasonry is not the greatest, if not the greatest, is one of the greatest moral and political evils under which the Union is now laboring. Isn't that interesting, Tim?
Yep.
Very fascinating. Folks, last segment of hour number one's coming up. Good grief, I'll tell you what, this flies by when we start doing. I love Conspiracy Chronicles Sundays.
We need a 3-hour show.
Yes, we do.
It's just not enough time.
So when we come back, we'll continue with the history of the NWO. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. I'd like to take a second to thank each and every one of you that have contributed with your hard-earned dollars to the effort in advancing Orion Talk Radio and making it as big as it is today and helping it grow by leaps and bounds. And you can contribute, folks, by going and clicking on the Orion Chip-In banner, which is on the left-hand side of the website. You give it a click, and you can help us spread the truth and help get the word out. Not when this day and age it's so important, especially with the continuing attacks on our natural God-given rights, that we put our best foot forward. So if you can't get active, by doing activism, then support those that do. And you can do that again by clicking on the Chip-In banner on the left-hand side of our website. Now, again, Joe Joseph and Tim Watts here. We're talking about the NWO, the history behind this, and why we're in the place that we are today, why we're seeing all these events converge on one another. I mean, I really, truly think they're making their move here to take the United States out as their last hurdle to really bringing this new world order about. And Timmy, you were talking about during the break. You were talking about before we get into the 1800s. You're talking about the Hamiltonian idea and the institution of the first national bank of the United States.
Yeah, it all comes down to money again, folks, clearly. And just a little history here. We've only had 3 forms of interest-free currency in this country in the history of the United States. And that was, again, as we referenced, the colonial script, which England took away with the Currency Act of 1751 and the Currency Act of 1764. But we also had Lincoln's greenbacks during the Civil War. And then after that, it was John F. Kennedy's failed attempt at the silver certificate with Executive Order 11110. So you've got 3 forms of currency, excuse me, that were supposed to be interest-free, and all of those were, done away with in favor of central banks, and that's what they wanted, and again, that is, the great evil in this world. It's not your little banker down at the corner, these are the big central banks, the ones that actually run all of the smaller banks. And let's see, 1791, we had our first national bank in the United States. And back then, our forefathers, they knew, Joe, about the fact that, big money, was something to be feared. Matter of fact, there's a whole lot of quotes that we could go into tonight from Jefferson and everybody else, on how they felt about big money. Let me see. You've got one from Jefferson where he said he believes that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. You've got James Madison, who says history records that money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. I mean,
Well, even you go way back. Let's go way back to the time of Christ. What did he do to the money changers?
You betcha. He overturned.
You know what I'm saying? He overturned the tables in the temple, right? I mean, this goes way back. This is not a surprise to anybody. So why do we keep falling for the same ruse time after time, Tim?
And other people have known. I mean, it goes back, Napoleon Bonaparte. He said when a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they and not the leaders of the government control the situation. Leo Tolstoy said money is the possibility or the right to exploit the labors of others. Money is a new form of slavery, which differs from the old one only in being impersonal and in freeing people from all the human relations of the slave. All these people understood what big money meant, and what it could do to a country. And so, our forefathers understood that very well. And with that, when the first national bank was chartered in the United States, that was a central bank. It was formed in 1791. Our forefathers had, the prescience to say, we're only going to give you a 20-year charter. And matter of fact, Joe, they did that with corporations at the time, too, because they knew corporations could become big and unwieldy and possibly larger than the state. So, central banks, corporations all had a 20-year charter. So the first national bank, that was supported by Alexander Hamilton, that ran from 1791 to 1811, and then that charter ran out. Well, of course, the Rothschilds wanted another one in, so they set up the second national bank, which went into play in 1816, and that one actually came about. They kind of tricked the United States into forming that one because of the War of 1812. We'd run up so much debt, so we had to have another central bank to somehow ease that debt. That was in place until 1832 because that's when Andrew Jackson, he vetoed the bank bill on July 10th of 1832. And actually, I shouldn't say it didn't die in 1832. That was just the beginning of it when Jackson vetoed the bank bill. And then in 1833, he pulled out all U.S. funds out of the Second National Bank. That was, in essence, the real death knell. And then its charter, which was supposed to run out in 1836, a 20-year charter, it finally did expire. And then we were rid of the last national bank, the Second National Bank. Well, what happened? the Rothschild bankers over in England got pretty PO'd at Andrew Jackson, and they tried to take him out, didn't they, Joe? An assassination attempt that actually failed, but they were pretty PO'd about the fact that we didn't have another central bank. And
That's
so now
right.
we're up to the third central bank, which is coming, but I'll defer back to Joe, and we'll get to the third national bank in just a moment.
That's right. And speaking of that time, right before Jackson became president, right around 1821, there's a gentleman by the name of George W.F. Hegel who formulates what is called the Hegelian dialectic. This is a very, very important piece of information and time in our human history, because the Hegelian dialectic is the process by which the Illuminati objectives are achieved. According to the Hegelian dialectic, thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. In other words, first, you foment a crisis. Then there's an enormous public outcry that something must be done about the problem. So you offer a solution that brings about the change you really wanted all along, but which people would have been unwilling to accept initially. Isn't that interesting, Tim, when you think about what just happened in Newtown, Connecticut, and the fight for our Second Amendment rights, and how they're under attack, and how there are countless legislators calling for change.
Yeah.
And where does this change come from?
Yeah.
Where does the change come from, and who does it benefit, Tim?
It benefits the ultra wealthy in the end. It benefits those people that want to take over. Yeah, go on. I just missed my thought there, but that's fine.
That's okay. That's okay. Here's the thing, and we're gonna end hour number one with this, and I want this to really sink in, and this is why I waited till now to nail you with the Hegelian dialectic. I'm going to read this one more time. This is how important this is. This goes back to 1821, okay? Thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. First, you foment a crisis. Then there's an enormous public outcry that something must be done about the problem. So you offer a solution that brings about the change you really wanted all along, but which people would have been unwilling to accept initially. Now go and look at what's going on today in the media and in your conversations on Facebook, and look at what is happening here. What you're seeing is the Hegelian dialectic in your face. And this, my friends, was the process that George W.F. Hegel put in place for the Illuminati to achieve their objectives. So, I'm going to ask one more time. Who would it benefit for the Second Amendment to be usurped? Would it benefit you at home because you'd be safer without your guns? Would it benefit the police because now all these awful guns are off the street? Are they really off the street? Of course not. Only legally law-abiding citizens would ever turn in their weapons. Criminals would never do it because they don't care about the law to begin with.
Nope.
So who does this benefit?
Folks, New World Order.
This benefits the bankers. And why? Let me tell you why that is. And it's not just bankers, but it's these people in power, these elitists that pull the strings of our non-representing representatives. And they know that people are waking up faster than they anticipated. And they know that they've looted and plundered not just the United States, but the world in general, to the point where they can't hide it anymore. And the curtain's going to fall on their little charade, on this big. It's not really a Ponzi scheme, but it certainly is fraud at the highest levels.
Oh yeah,
and theft, and they know this, so they don't want a country of armed citizens to be able to stop their diabolical plan for world domination. No, so they have to take it out, and what better way to take it out than to take advantage of a horrible situation that happened in the United States, the Newtown shootings. And Well, Timmy, one more thing is that it all came about because of what? I can trace it back to Big Pharma. If it really went down the way they said it did. But we're already finding evidence that that didn't happen either, that the mainstream media is lying. Hour number 1 is done. Hour number 2 is on the way. When we come back, we'll continue our journey through history to show you the setup of how we got to where we are today. And I'll even let Timmy get in a thought or two, too, because I'm losing my voice. So we'll be right back after these messages in the news, folks. Don't go away. Welcome back, folks. It's hour number 2 of the Freedom Links Conspiracy Chronicles here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph, along with my good friend Tim Watson. And Tim, at the end of the last hour, I was talking about the Hegelian dialectic and how many times in our history has that actually been used. And you brought up, one of the most horrific times in our nation's history that it's actually been employed.
Yeah, 9/11. They've done it over and over and over. I mean, every single chance they've got to use this principle. Create a problem, wait for the unsavory reaction, from the masses, and then propose the unpopular solution that you could never get, past during normal times. So they always try to upset the populace with something, get them all whipped up with fear, and then they come with that unpopular solution. Well, I know you don't like this, but it will alleviate this this discomfort you're feeling right now. So, and then people go along with it because, we don't want to live in fear. We don't want to be uncomfortable. And boy, did they smack us right in the face with it in 2001 with 9/11. That's how they set up this whole false war on terror with this Hegelian dialect. We got to take away your constitutional rights, your freedoms, because we're going to make you safe. But tell me, Joe, how can they guarantee our freedom? How can they guarantee our safety, I guess I should say? I mean, everybody in the listening audience, you got to think about that when they say give up your rights, give up your constitutional rights, and we're going to make you safe. Ask yourself, how are they going to guarantee that? Have they guaranteed anybody's safety since, all of these rights have been taken, Joe? It's preposterous to think that anybody could actually barter something that they cannot guarantee.
No, you're right.
You give us this, we'll give you that. Well, all right, we gave you our rights. Where's our safety? Because I don't see it.
No, I certainly don't see it either. And if anything, the threat to our safety doesn't come from forces abroad. It's coming from forces within. It's coming from forces within our own government and the people that control our government. Ain't that right, buddy?
Yeah, well, the forces abroad, they fomented the whole thing. And,
right.
So now, yes, you're right. We do have forces within, that work in tandem with these forces abroad. And it is all for a new world order, a one world rule by them, the ultra rich, the trillionaires of this world. And those trillionaires would be the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And yes, trillionaires do exist, folks. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and these guys are not the richest in the world. They'd rather have you think that, because then nobody's looking into the people with the real money, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and their hidden trillions that they've stolen from the people over the years.
Amen to that, buddy. And when I was talking about that, I'm talking about like the phony war on terror. They want you to think that that's the enemy. That's not the enemy. That's not the enemy. You know where our weakness really spawns? Our weakness spawns from the culture of convenience in this country that's been cultivated since the end of World War II, and also the fact that people are so into their things and very self-centered, and because of that, these banksters, they use it to their advantage. They use it to their advantage to be able to control you. If you don't have the Patriot Act, well then, life as we know it is going to change forever. Oh, yes, we must protect the way of life in this country by employing these draconian laws and methods to keep you safe. But in all honesty, it has nothing to do with keeping you safe. That's just what they want you to believe. And again, we've been going through, in just 1 hour, we were able to get up to 1821. I mean, and there's so much more. You can get into depth into all of these different events in history. But I'm going to take it to 1848. Moses Mordecai Marx Levy. You know who that is, Timmy?
Mr. Marx.
Yes, Karl Marx. Here he goes. He writes the Communist Manifesto. Marx, a member of the Illuminati, front organization called the League of the Just. He not only advocates economic and political changes, he advocates moral and spiritual changes as well. He believes the family should be abolished and that all children should be raised by a central authority. He expresses his attitude towards God by saying, quote, "We must war against all prevailing ideas of religion, of the state, of the country, and of patriotism. The idea of God is the keynote of a perverted civilization. It must be destroyed." And here we have today a Marxist at the very head of our government. And then you wonder why things are going down the tubes as they are. And we had a Marxist before him with the Bush family. Because don't think for a second that they're not all part of the problem too, right, Timmy?
Absolutely. They've been going back, hurting this country since World War I. 4 generations of treason with Samuel Bush, Prescott Bush, H.W. Bush, and then W. Bush. And we went through that with our 3-week series on the Bush family. But I tell you what, yeah, they are very well, entrenched in this whole deal for the New World Order. I mean, just look at George H.W. Bush's speech on, September 11th, 1991, when he's talking about bringing in the New World Order. 10 years to the day from when, September 11th happens.
Yeah, very much. I mean, this is all not coincidence, folks. This stuff happens clearly for a reason. Now, Timmy, in the 1800s, can you think of any other event that you'd want to key in on?
Oh, gads, I can think of a lot of them in the 1800s. I mean, the one big thing that happened in this country, once we got past the central banks, there was a war to get another central bank back in this country. The Rothschilds, after the death of the Second National Bank, when Andrew Jackson killed that, and they tried to kill him and he survived, they still wanted their central bank. And so there was this extreme effort to get their talons back into the United States. Now, the Civil War is not what, we think it was, folks. It's not what you were taught in school. This was a divide and conquer tactic. That's really all it was. It wasn't about slavery. It was about dividing the Union. And, once we started to heal from the Civil War, that to me is like one of the tipping points in this nation's history, Joey, because in just a short 36-year period of time, which would be like roughly from 1976 up until now, all right, very short period of time. There's many people out in the audience that can remember from 1976 until now. What would you say if during that period we had 3 presidents assassinated, from 1976 up until now? You'd say, my gosh, what the hell's going on in this country, Other countries would be looking and saying, what's going on? Well, we had that happen in our nation's history. In 1865, you had Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated. In 1881, you had James Garfield, who was assassinated. In 1901, you had William McKinley, who was assassinated. Again, a short 36-year period of time. So you got to ask yourself, what's going on? There is a power struggle behind the scenes to bring in a new central bank. And that's what it's all about. And shortly after McKinley's death is when we get to the 3rd central bank that came into the United States, and the last one that we've got so far, and that is the Federal Reserve.
Interesting that you bring that up, because it was during that time, right before the Federal Reserve, that a certain person within the Wilson administration, a close advisor to President Wilson, actually published a book that promoted socialism in America. And that was Colonel Edward Mandell House, Tim.
Yep. Yeah, he was a very devious figure. You talk about, like people like Dick Cheney, being a blight on our political system, when he was in office here. But Edward Mandell House, I mean, there's a real creep. That guy had his talents in so many things back then. And he's very much a part of why, we are where we are today. Edward Mandell House was like a stooge for Rockefeller, and he's the guy that actually helped start the Council on Foreign Relations.
That's right. He penned the work Philip Drew, Administrator. And in that, I mean, he lays the groundwork and the foundation for the socialist takeover of America.
It's like a guideline. It's like a roadmap. That whole book, Philip Drew Administrator. That's what they followed. All along.
And what a bizarre title, too. It really has nothing to do, if you think about it, at first glance, with what it promotes and what it talks about.
Nope.
But the interesting thing to glean from Edward Mandell House, Tim, was that he's one of the founding members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And that is a very, very interesting coincidence, considering that the Council on Foreign Relations really helps mold a lot of the foreign policy decisions in this country. So these nefarious people, they laid the groundwork, and now you can start to see how these organizations within the United States and throughout the world really dictate the policy of our government. Folks, we'll be right back after these messages. More when the Conspiracy Chronicles continues after these messages. Folks, don't forget, immediately following the Freedom Links Conspiracy Chronicles is the Information Nation with Ken Hildebrand. Ken takes a hard look at the news that the newsmakers soon learn to regret. He calls it the way he sees them, and sometimes it ain't pretty. Tune in tonight to the Information Nation, 9 to 11 Eastern, right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Joe Joseph and Tim Watson, we're going through, why? Why is there a move right now to take away your Second Amendment right? Now, remember, folks, we have to give that away. I want to make that crystal clear, and you've heard me say that many times. They'll use the threat of jail. They'll use the threat of death. But in the end, you still have to give those rights away. They can't take them from you. And the culmination of what's happening right now is a culmination of years and years of groundwork and agendas behind the scene to get us to where we are. And the next step in this line of history is 1913. Now, on February 3rd, 1913, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, making it possible for the federal government to impose a progressive income tax, is ratified. Oh, by the way, plank number 2 of the Communist Manifesto. And in Canada, for all our Canadian listeners, the income tax is introduced in 1917 as a, quote, temporary measure to finance the war effort. At the same time this is happening, President Woodrow Wilson publishes The New Freedom, in which he reveals, quote, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the U.S. in the field of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." Isn't that interesting, Tim?
Oh, yeah. They've all spoken about that, that there is a hidden power, behind the scenes. Teddy Roosevelt talked about it. Howard Taft talked about it. So many, presidents back in the day all knew that there was a heavily moneyed power that was actually behind, our politicians, a secret government. And that's exactly what Teddy Roosevelt called it. He called it a secret government. Same thing we've got today, Joe.
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it was in December 23rd, 1913, the Federal Reserve is created. It was planned at a secret meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island by a group of bankers and politicians, including the infamous Edward Mandell House. And this transfers the power to create money from the American government to a private group of bankers. Understand that one very, very, very important statement I just said. Transferred power from the American government to a private group of bankers. The Federal Reserve Act is hastily passed just before the Christmas break. Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., father of the famed aviator, warns, quote, This act establishes the most gigantic trust on the earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. Timmy, we talked about the money trust at great length.
Yeah. Yeah, they all talked about the money trust, and they call it that exact word, the money trust. It was something that they were very fearful of back then because they knew that people were becoming richer than the government, and specifically the Rockefellers. But to back up a little bit from 1910, Joe, or 1913, I should say, you know, when you go back to this original coup that happened, and when it happened on Jekyll Island, there's things about Jekyll Island folks need to know. Number one, a lot of rich people lived on Jekyll Island. That was like their little private retreat. And the wealth of these people that actually lived on Jekyll Island equated to one-sixth of the world's wealth at that time. That's the kind of wealth that was congregated on Jekyll Island. So there's a reason why they met there. You know, 6 men, they leave a Hoboken, New Jersey train station, you know, under the cover of dark and in secret. Matter of fact, so secret that none of them, you know, were allowed to say their names when they arrived at Jekyll Island. They didn't want any of the servants there to know who was in attendance. Matter of fact, they went out of their way to get rid of all the servants that actually worked there just temporarily and brought in temporary servants that would, you know, work this little meeting that was going on there in the hopes that nobody would recognize these famous people, these famous rich people that were meeting to plan a coup on the United States. Now, there's something very significant about the day they met, November 22nd in 1910. You know, a lot of people remember that date for another reason, because that's the date we had the second coup on America, and that's the death of John F. Kennedy. And I honestly think they picked that day for a significant reason, because, again, this is the day that they planned their first coup on the United States, November 22nd, 1910, under the guise of a duck hunting trip, you know, that was led by, you know, Senator Nelson Aldrich. He became the head of the National Monetary Commission, and that was something that was formed kind of as, you know, the powers that be pushed the government into this with that, you know, that the 1907 start of the Great Depression, which J.P. Morgan started by telling everybody that a New York bank was about to go insolvent, and it started a huge run on the banks. So all along the way, you know, this Hegelian dialect, this principle just keeps continuing itself. So they created a problem, and then they offered a solution. Oh, we need to have this National Monetary Commission. So Nelson Aldrich takes charge of that. And then he now, from there, leads this special duck hunting trip to Jekyll Island to foment this coup against the United States in 1910. And as you said, the Federal Reserve is born in 1913, and the rest is history. And now the U.S. has its third central bank, something our forefathers didn't want.
That's right. And if, folks, if any of you remember, or if any of you think back in your history, you'll know that President Woodrow Wilson, in his second term, got gravely ill. He had strokes, and actually in the last couple of years of his presidency, it's said that Edith Galt, his wife, his new bride, he actually got married while in the White House, was actually running the day-to-day operations of the country because he just was not capable of doing it. And if you want to know what I believe truly led to the demise of his health, just listen to this quote. Now, this is 3 years after signing the Federal Reserve Act into law. This is in 1916. President Woodrow Wilson observes, quote, he says, "I'm a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." Do you not need any more evidence than that from a president who openly said before he passed away, look, this is it. Listen to how horrible and the guilt. He says, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. Imagine, Tim, if you're faced with that guilt, what that would do to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you realize you your country, you bet. And Wilson wasn't expected to win that election either. It was only after Bernard Baruch and these rich people came to him and said, hey, look, you do our bidding and we'll get you into the White House. And that's essentially what happened. They got him into the White House, and then, once he was in, that's when they attached Colonel Edward M. House, into his administration, and the rest is history.
That's right. A babysitter, if you will, for the banksters. Folks, we'll be back after the bottom of the hour news, so don't go away. When we come back, we'll get into the 20s and the 30s and what that all means to us as far as what we're going through today. Amazing story, folks. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back, folks. From the 9 to 11 p.m. Slot here on the Orion Talk Radio Network, Popeye of FederalJack.com and Down the Rabbit Hole will be filling in for Holland Van Den Nieuwenhof this week. So make sure you stay tuned. After the Information Nation, Popeye takes to the airwaves once again to talk about current events and anything else that he really wants to talk about. But we're talking about the New World Order. And, this time in American history.
And specifically the takeover of the U.S., too.
Absolutely. And this time in our nation's history, Tim, in the the teen years and then the 20s and the 30s, this is like an extremely important time in our history because, this is like one of the major coups, if you will, of our government, with the inception of the Federal Reserve. And again, Woodrow Wilson just telling people, oh, gosh, boy, what did I do? Oh, what did I do? And of course, I really, truly believe that the guilt is what led to the rapid demise of his health. And then you look at 1917, with the aid of the financiers in New York and London, Vladimir Lenin is able to overthrow the government of Russia. Lenin later comments on the apparent contradiction of the links between prominent capitalists and communism. This is straight from Lenin. Quote, there also exists another alliance, at first glance a strange one, a surprising one. But if you think about it, in fact, one which is well-grounded and easy to understand. This is the alliance between our communist leader and you capitalists. Remember the Hegelian dialectic, folks? And then 1919, on May 30th, prominent British and American personalities established the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England and the Institute of International Affairs in the U.S. at a meeting arranged by none other than Colonel House, attended by various Fabian socialists, including noted economist, where have we heard this before, John Maynard Keynes. Ever hear of Keynesian economics? Very interesting. And, of course, it was in 1920 that Britain's Winston Churchill recognized the connection between the Illuminati and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, where he observed, quote, from the days of Spartacus Weishaupt. Now, notice, Winston Churchill is giving you the name of the father of the Illuminati concept. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, to those of Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstruction of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played a definitely recognizable role in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hairs on their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. And that was Winston Churchill, Tim.
Yep, he's also the guy that said the victor always writes the history.
That's right.
And people wonder, why they don't know what's happened because, the victor has been the ultra wealthy, and they own all the publishing houses. Everything that you read is, run by the ultra wealthy. So it's no wonder that we don't know the truth in this country because a victor always writes the history.
That's right. Now, in this time, there was also another person, but he wasn't working for them. He was working against them. And that was Louis T. McFadden, chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Currency, concerning the Federal Reserve. Congressman McFadden penned, quote, "When the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of these United States did not perceive that a world banking system was being set up here. A super state controlled by international bankers and international industrialists acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. Every effort has been made by the Fed to conceal its powers. But the truth is, the Fed has usurped the government. It controls everything here, and it controls all of our foreign relations. It makes and breaks governments at will. Now, concerning the Great Depression and the country's acceptance of FDR's New Deal, he asserts, quote, "It was no accident. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so they might emerge as the rulers of us all. And that's exactly what happened, and we have been slaves to them ever since." Isn't that right, Timmy?
Absolutely. And Kennedy tried to undo it all. He knew about the Federal Reserve, and what did he say he wanted to do? He wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve, just like, a lot of other congressmen today, like Congressman Kucinich and Ron Paul. Now, look what's happened to these guys. Ron Paul, mounts, a very, the best grassroots campaign we've seen in years. You'd think, oh, gosh, this guy's a shoo-in. But no, the guy can't even make it to the ballot for his own party. Because why? Because he opposes the Federal Reserve. Dennis Kucinich, a guy they could never knock out of Congress. He just kept winning and winning and winning because he stood against the Federal Reserve. So what do? They just took his district away. Okay, we're not going to worry about you getting reelected because we just took your district.
That's right.
That's what happens when you stand up to the Federal Reserve. And as far as Louis T. McFadden, boy, he was a vocal critic of the Federal Reserve, and you can see what it got him. They poisoned the guy. They killed him. That's just another one of the fatalities of the Federal Reserve cartel.
That's right. And all you have to do, folks, is look back in history. This is nothing new. This is not something that Timmy and I just, went and found after years and years of research. It took us years and years of research to kind of bring everything all together. But, I mean, we're not the first people to talk about this. And you hear significant people in history speaking about the very power that is ruining this country and has been for quite some time. So I would suggest, folks, that you take the time out and start looking into this. Now, one of the sources that I use tonight, and I will let you and please visit this and look into this, is michaeljournal.org. That's michaeljournal.org. It's a fantastic publication that dives into a whole slew of topics, but this one in particular was into the NWO. And, I mean, what an awesome timeline it is. And what this is going to be, folks, is it's going to be a 2-week process. We're going to have to take it through a couple of weeks in order for you to actually see the big picture and why we're where we are today. I mean, this is so important. You cannot understand where we are unless you know the history. You have to be students of history, the real history, not the rewritten history that you learn in our school system. And, speaking of real history, it was in 1921, Tim, like we said, Colonel House, Edward Mandell House, of course, was the father of the CFR. And in 1921, that's when the CFR came to pass, when he reorganized the American branch of the Institute of International Affairs into the Council on Foreign Relation. And in December 15th, 1922, the CFR endorses world government in its magazine Foreign Affairs. Author Philip Kerr states, quote, obviously, there's going to be no peace nor prosperity for mankind as long as the earth remains divided into 50 or 60 independent states. Until some kind of international system is created, the real problem today is that of world government. So what he's saying is that there's a need for world government and global governance. See, global governance is just a crafty little term that the powers that be have come up and rebranded it. But this stuff has been going on since trying to get the League of Nations established, Tim.
Yeah, well, Paul Warburg, told the Council on Foreign Relations, back in the 50s, he said, and this is a very interesting quote, he says, we shall have one world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or by consent. And then there's even more quotes, Joey, for people that don't know, the Rockefeller connection. We can get into those in a little bit if you want. But, David Rockefeller has said some very damning things. If folks, if you doubt, what their intent is, here's one of the richest men in the world, a trillionaire, and he's talking about the fact that there is going to be a new world order. 3 quotes that we could, come up with from Rockefeller. We can talk about those in a little bit if you'd like.
Absolutely, Tim. Absolutely. I mean, this is all very important stuff and all needs to be talked about. So when we come back from break, folks, we're going to stop here. We're going to recap everything that we talked about tonight, and we'll have the King's Court. We'll be right back. As we wrap this edition of the Freedom Links Conspiracy Chronicles up this Sunday evening, I'd like to invite everybody again to stay tuned at 9 p.m. Eastern for the Information Nation with Ken Hildebrand. And following Ken's show, we'll have Popeye filling in for Holland Vanden Nieuwenhof. So it'll be a great night of radio. Please stay tuned to the great programming offered by the Orion Talk Radio Network. Joe Joseph, Tim Watts, and oh my goodness, look at who's here. Why, it's John King. So, without further ado, let's call the King's Court into session. John King, take it away.
John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 11110, ordering the U.S. Treasury to issue a new value-based government-issued currency, which would have been known as a United States note. He put $4.5 billion in circulation in 1963, which in today's dollars, that's over $32.5 billion. That's a lot of money. John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank and president of the World Bank at that time, was put on the Warren Commission to investigate President Kennedy's death. Folks, money is not the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. At 7 a.m. this morning, I saw Mr. Tim Watts online, and I Skyped him to ask him what the show topic was going to be so I could write a suitable King's Court. When he told me the Federal Reserve, I thought, easy sleazy. But that's the low road, taking the easy way out. So I began a little research. Now, I'm a big fan of SGT Bull 07 of YouTube, as well as his website, sgtreport.com, so I began to look at his YouTube videos as well as scouring other websites for information. Suddenly, I had an epiphany. Occupy Wall Street was not going to work because there's no real agenda. And for the Fed to listen to the people, well, they would actually have to give a damn. They don't. So good luck with that. Occupy your wallets won't work because you're still playing the game. Buying gold and silver will not work because they keep dumping more and more paper fiat into the system to dilute the price, and the wheels on the bus go round and round. So what do? I believe President Kennedy had the right idea. No, we can't print our own currency, but we can stop participating in this fiat system. Stop participating in the game. Stop using Federal Reserve notes. Wean yourself off of credit. Credit is debt. Every time you use your credit, you're fueling the machine. Live within your means. I do and have adapted and living quite modestly and comfortably with few worries. I believe there should be a national push for a value-based economy, and the people of this country should come together and demand we create a national currency and default on the Federal Reserve. Now, it may take 20 years to recover, but at least our grandchildren will not have to lick the boot that kicked them in the first place. What's the price of the answer? I believe President Kennedy paid it. He was used as an example. Let's follow his example. Demand real money now. Surely there is someone out there who is infinitely smarter and more resourceful than this mill monkey ever could. The only real way to end the Fed is to legislate them away. Court adjourned.
Very good, John. Thank you very much. And very fitting, might I add, at this juncture, as we wrap up Conspiracy Chronicles for this week. Remember, folks, next Sunday from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern, we're going to get into part 2 of the historical look into how we've gotten to where we are today. And I can't stress this up, this Hegelian dialectic, enough. I cannot stress it enough. Look at how many times the Hegelian dialectic has been employed in this country in just recent times, including last week. It's unbelievably chilling to hear the voices of the past come out and tell us in their own words why we're here today. Isn't that right, Timmy?
Yep, all but for the love of big money and a plan for the New World Order, which will be run by the big money. And that's what this is about, folks. How can the New World Order take over, when you've got a country so well armed as the United States? We are the roadblock. We are the roadblock to the New World Order. They failed, with their first attempt, after the World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. So they do have failures, folks. They've got failures in their history, and they're trying one more time really hard to take this country from us. And this gun grab is a huge part of it.
And you have to look through the oppression, the divide and conquer, the fact that you have to work your tail off now just to make ends meet, to understand that all of these things are put in place not only to fund these this cabal at the top, and to keep the coffers full, but at the same time, it's to keep you distracted, to keep you off their tail. You have to understand that. Folks, we're not as dumb as they think we are. And the only way that you're going to be able to understand the true history of what's happened to us and why we're here now is to plug in. To plug in and to do the homework and to spread the word. This is not an easy subject for people to understand. First of all, people don't like to be told they're wrong. And second of all, it's a hard thing. It's a hard sell. I mean, just think about this. How hard is it to tell somebody that, pretty much the United States has been co-opted, since it's been founded?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a horribly hard sell. But if you take it in the timeline, much like we've done tonight, and we'll continue next week, it really lays it all out in a fashion to where you can't dispute it, where people have to say, good grief, are you serious? Like tonight, for example, the Lindbergh kidnapping, based on what we've said, kind of puts the Lindbergh kidnapping in a whole different perspective now.
Yeah.
At least for me, and it's because you brought that up. I'm like, oh, wow, yeah. You know what? Maybe I should dive into that a little bit more and see down the rabbit hole you go, folks. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen, before we hand the baton off to Ken Hildebrand?
Well, this, number one, folks, you've got to be able to see this has been clearly orchestrated, what's happening to this country. And, everything from 9/11, we look at everything that's happened from 9/11 on, and nothing good has happened for our constitutional rights. Sure, you still get to go shop at Walmart and you get to turn on Dancing with the Stars at night, but if you watch behind the scenes, as we are, and you see the things that they're putting in place, the machinations taking place, it's all with an effort, to get us to the New World Order. And this gun grab is just part of it. The economic collapse, that's another part of it. I mean, take a look at the fact, that all the money they gave out, $16 trillion. Now, was that the right way to right our economy? It wasn't. And what it clearly shows that this whole thing was orchestrated. Again, we've talked about the fact that there's economists that have master's degrees, and they decided to give $16 trillion to the banks and the richest corporations. That was the best way to right our economy. Or maybe was it to take $16 trillion, divide that between all persons of working age, we'll just say 18 plus. That guarantees every single one of us a check for $100,000. Now think about what each of you would have done with a check for $100,000. You would have paid your mortgage off, no more mortgage crisis. You would have paid bills. You would have bought things you needed, which stimulated retail, which would in turn have stimulated manufacturing. And in turn, then that money would have eventually made its way to the bank. But they chose not to do any of that. And just that recourse alone shows you that this whole thing is orchestrated and manipulated, because there was another way they could have righted this economy by giving that money to each one of you. You all could have gotten a check for $100,000 out of the minimum $16 trillion they gave out, Joy. And I think, a lot of people are alluding that it could be as high as $38 trillion.
That's right. I mean, unbelievable amount of money that went to the bankers. John King, your final thoughts.
Well, guys, this club of banksters has been around for quite some time, and it's like an octopus. They have their tentacles up even some politicians' butts. And how do you kill an octopus? Well, you cut the head off. You're not going to make this place go away with just a few protests. We've got to utilize one thing, 3 words: we the people. That's how we're going to stop them, by standing up and making and demanding our politicians issue a new currency that's not federal fiat-based reserved.
Amen to that, my good buddy. And as we wrap up the broadcast, just a little heads up on the week ahead. On Wednesday night, my guest is Alfred Adisk. We're going to be talking about the new Obama administration, what it means to us. And we'll also get into this Second Amendment issue as well with him and get his thoughts on that. Alfred, a brilliant individual, and he'll be shedding his insight on what's happening in the United States today. And then on Thursday, we'll have constitutional expert and former presidential candidate, libertarian presidential candidate, Michael Badnarik, will join us on Thursday, again, to talk about the usurpation of the Constitution and what we can do to restore America. Very interesting way to do it, and no better person, I think, out there than Michael Badnarik to shed some light on the Constitution and the issues that we face today. So, folks, and coming up again on the Information Nation with Ken Hildebrand, the topic of tonight is Between Bullets and BS Part 2. So make sure you stay tuned for Ken Hildebrand. He'll be doing a fantastic broadcast, and Popeye after him. So on behalf of Tim Watts and John King, have a good night, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Night, guys.
See you next week.